right, so my talk is on doing builds and deploys using Jenkins and Acquia Cloud. This was actually done for the United Rentals project, starting about a year and a half ago, actually. And we were able to make some really good changes to improve our processes and really help us out. For those of you who do not know who I am a Drupal developer. I have been working as a programmer professionally since 2007 when I graduated from here at UMKC. I have some information up here. Don't go to my patrickthurmond.com because it's embarrassing that I have not yet fixed my SSL certificate. I just noticed that last night. All right. So we had some trouble with our deployments. We had a deployment that didn't quite go as well as we'd like to do with the client on the line. It was about 9 p.m. at night, and we started running the deployment, and it was run in such a way that it had to go through Bitbucket pipelines that wasn't quite so easy to edit. You had to edit files in order to make it work, and then push them up to the repository. And it would go a good way through the JavaScript part of the build and then die. And that did not turn out so well for us, because it turned out that one of the repositories that we were dependent on, one of the JavaScript dependencies, its repository was down for about an hour. Kind of embarrassing to have the client on the line and not be able to do the build, do the deploy, and it really also made it so that we couldn't test ahead of time exactly what would be on the environment when we got it up there. So we came up with a new solution. Build it once, deploy it everywhere. This was probably done by many people long before we did this, and we had to discover it the hard way. So first of all, let's talk about Jenkins. We used a solution using Jenkins, and then we were already using Acquia for our hosting. Jenkins is a CI/CD tool. It can be customized to do just about anything you want. It's built in Java, and it's an open source tool that allows you to do a lot of automation, to automate all sorts of different tasks. You can remotely trigger it. You can have it trigger based on your Bitbucket or GitHub or any kind of repository webhooks that you might set up. You can have it monitor as well. And so we tried to do a simple approach, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. And then Acquia Cloud. Acquia is actually a company that provides Drupal hosting that was made by a group that produce and develop Drupal core. Some very smart people behind it. They have offices. They have people situated all over the world for support, and they provide really good hosting. I believe all of it's done through AWS. So our solution here was to pump everything to Jenkins and have Jenkins connect over to a build server that does our builds for us, and then send that over to the Git repository provided by Acquia, which you have to use to get stuff up into Acquia, and then have that pushed up onto the web server. If this wants to work for me. Okay. So there are just a few steps. You do your normal branching, make your changes, make your commits, and then push your branch up. You make your pull request, and the pull request is actually key for how we set ours up, because we still utilize some of Bitbucket pipelines in order to do the triggering of the build. So what we do is we have a little script that I can show you guys later on that monitors for changes to certain branches. And so whenever we do a pull request merge, it sends a curl command over to Jenkins to trigger a job. So once the build's been triggered, we let the build run, and then we go over to Acquia and we manually deploy it to whatever we want. You can also set it so that it not only creates a build branch, but also pushes to a common branch like a develop branch on Acquia, so that you can have your dev environment or whichever environment you want set to always always deploy the latest from that branch. So whenever Acquia sees a change to a branch like the develop branch, it will automatically deploy that to that environment if that environment is set to that particular branch. And what you see here is the base of the United Rentals repository. So if you want to get started on this, you create your repository, implement your Drupal setup, and get yourself going so you have a working Drupal setup locally, and get that committed up there. Get your branch set up, and decide how you want to do this. We were using the develop branch because originally we had everything under the master branch was for our Drupal 7 version, and then we ended up moving to Drupal 8 using the same repository, and so we moved the Drupal 8 stuff into the develop branch itself. Most people use a master branch in order to do their normal development, but go ahead and figure out ahead of time which flow that you want to use, and the most commonly used one is just your Git flow. At least that's what I understand. We kind of use a variation on that and probably don't follow it as strictly as we should. But the idea is to make it easy so you can do hot fixing, so you can do custom feature branches, and then make a workflow that doesn't interrupt any aspect of it, whether it's new development or going back and fixing what's in production if there's something that was discovered last minute. So whatever method you decide, set it up before you get too far into it, if you can. And then once you get your repository set up, get your flow figured out, you'll want to start working on your deploy hooks. Now, the hooks is a feature in Acquia that allows you to do a variety of things. I took a screenshot here of my repository locally on P2P Storm, and you can see that it has a number of different folders that it offers. So by default, Acquia will have a common folder that will have subfolders for the actions that you want to act on. You have your post-code deploy, which is obviously once you've deployed your code, we want to go ahead and run these scripts. Then you have your post-code update. I have not utilized it yet, so I can't really tell you too much about the changes there. Then you have the DB copy. So if you're moving your database down from production to dev, QA stage, and you have certain actions you want to take, I would honestly recommend probably the same actions as you have for your deploy. It'll run any scripts that are in there. And then your file copy. So Acquia has the ability to also allow you to drag your files for your whole file set from one environment to another. And so that way you can keep everything in sync very, very easily. And then I have not used the pre-web activate just yet, so I can't tell you too much about that. Now, the setup we have in here, I'm going to back up one step. You can use the common folder for all environments. Then you can actually set up a folder for each environment if you want to do environment-specific things. So if you want to do something on prod, where whenever you do a deploy, it automatically puts a mark in your New Relic saying, "Hey, we had a deploy in this date, and this is the build ID that we did." That way, you can go into New Relic and see where you have your deploy, and if it caused an issue, all of a sudden you see a bunch of errors appearing right after deploy. Well, you know that was a bad build. What you see in here is a shared folder that we've added to, and this is a concept I came up with that allows us to have the bash scripts be included in any one of those environment folders, whether it's common, prod, dev, stage, and allows us to basically write our code once and have the actions happen in each place without having to rewrite our code. Just basic code sharing. So when we go look at some of these script files up under the common, you actually see that it includes the stuff that's shared, and then shared has the bulk of the commands that are running. The other thing you'll notice is we have numbers set next to each one of these scripts. So Acquia will execute the scripts in alphanumeric order that you see them in. So if you have stuff that you want to run first, then you'll want to use a numbering system or an alphabet or however you want to do it to make sure that it loads things in the order you want. In this case, some of the stuff became easy for us because New Relic is the last thing we wanted to kick off, and so that because of the name, it automatically runs last. But we want to run our Drupal commands first because those are the most important things to run. It'll run all of our standard Drupal cache clearing and config import, Drupal database updates, things like that. And then after that, we want to kick off our automatic testing with our QA scripts. So that's what the second one does. Then we capture that tag and we record that tag somewhere else on the file system so that we can identify what build tag is running on that environment at any given moment. And then we have our New Relic stuff. Okay. All right. So the postcode deploy hook, as I mentioned before, we are going through here and we're running each one of the scripts. And this is the most important script that we have right here. As you can see, we set it to maintenance mode, clear cache, update, run our entity updates, config sync, another cache clear. We take it back out of maintenance mode and do one final cache clear and then clear the Acquia domain. Purge, so that'll clear varnish for us. We have seen situations where you have to manually go in and run config sync twice because of some things won't get initialized properly. It'll throw some errors, and you'll have a deploy that'll fail. But you can still use drush either locally or sshn if you have, depending on how you have it configured, and run it a second time, and it will work usually. Okay, so the setup of Jenkins kind of comes last because you want to make sure that Acquia works for you. You want to make sure your repository works fine for you. The setup of Jenkins seems kind of complicated. Their user interface is probably more convoluted than it needs to be, but it works well and it's very flexible and there's tons of documentation and it's free, so you can't complain too much about it. So we set up our own parameters for the build and for the commit hash, and so this way we can identify what build number, and that is a more of a manual configuration we do whenever we want to manually do a build, and the commit hash is there whenever we want to just use the commit hash from the repository. We always want to set it to, in the case of our build server, we were building using the same directory on the build server every time. Ideally, it would be great if we could launch a VM in Acquia using like Docker and just have it, running different threads as many times as we want. But for now, what we have is it goes into a directory, it checks out the code, and then it uses Docksol, which is a Docker manager, to run through the commands that we have for our build process. And so we want to set it to only use one build at a time, and then you want to connect it to your Git repository, enable remote triggering, and then set up your connection to your build server and your build script. So triggering the Jenkins jobs. Earlier I mentioned that we use Bitbucket pipelines in order to trigger the builds. This is only for one particular branch that we do it for. And I don't know that I actually included that script in here anywhere. But the builds, this is just a segment of the script that it takes all the information from the pipelines it has access to. There's a few things I obviously didn't want to include in here, such as some tokens, but it allows us to go in and the first thing we actually have to do is get a crumb. It's a way for them to verify that there's not some external scripting going on, that we actually have authorization to do what we're doing. And so this gets us basically a token back for this first call versus crum equals. And then after that, we load that information into the header and call the server and the path right there to tell it to build it. And as you can see with this path, we have a job group called United Rentals, and the job itself is the merge builder. And then we tell it to build with parameters. There is just a build, and then there's a build with parameters. I prefer to use parameters because we can specify more information during the build process, so we can identify the build on Acquia, and for any troubleshooting we might want to do in Jenkins. The other option that we did not use is webhooks, and I've included a URL here. Later on, at the end of this, there will be some information on how to get my slides, if you do want a copy of this. Yes?
Regarding the Bitbucket pipeline, the script which you wrote, where do you put that script? Like, is it in the code or is it on Bitbucket somewhere that you put it?
It's in your. So the pipelines portion of that actually has to sit in your code base that is being in the repository that is being run. So whenever you do your merge in, wherever there is a YML file in there that you specify your actions and what branches you want to take those actions on, and then what scripts you want to run when it sees certain actions happening on that branch.
Oh, so this is inside the hooks, the one which...
No, this is inside of the Bitbucket repository. And actually, I'm going to exit out of this real quick so I can show you. Go down to here. All right, so you see here, we have a Bitbucket pipelines YML file.
We can't see it.
Oh, you can't see it, son of a gun. All right. Let's see. Not sure where it is. Oh, 8. Desktop 8. How do I? Oh, here we go. Excellent. Okay. All right. So as you can see here, we have this Bitbucket pipelines file. Apparently, it is cutting it off on the left edge for those people here in the building, but you'll see that it's bitbucket-pipelines.yml. They have their own documentation, which I have listed here at the top of this, or at least some information about it at the top of this YML file. But what this does is it actually has its own Docker build that it uses, and it runs any commands you want on it, and then we're specifying the develop branch, and as a step, once this branch gets merged to, it's going to trigger this, run this trigger build sh script, and then trigger builds. I'll just go up into there, which I am losing my mind. Build Jenkins trigger build. This guy takes input from Bitbucket itself and turns this into that bit of code that I was talking about that triggers the build on Jenkins using a curl call. So it does require a little bit of stuff in your code, which is why you might consider using webhooks over this implementation. All right, go back to what I was doing over here. And to play. All right. Okay. So as we with the build script, what you need to do is make sure that the source repository is cloned. We don't want to add your Acquia repository as a remote repository to that clone. Check out that latest commit, and then create your new build branch. You'll also want to clear out any of your paths that are automatically filled in from your composer file. So your core files, any contrib directories, any node modules, if that's applicable to your setup. Then the first thing you'll want to run is your composer install, and followed by any theme building commands. And then obviously I mentioned the new build The other thing that we ran into is sometimes when Composer pulls down a Git repository, it will include its .git subdirectory. It's not supposed to. I'm not quite sure what causes that, but it does occasionally do that. So we actually created a script, a bash script, that scans for any .git subdirectories that come in and removes those .git directories so that it doesn't have any issues with the Git submodules. Otherwise, it won't get pushed up into Acquia. Once you get all of your code in the right spot, all you have to do is add everything into Git and commit it to the branch. Another thing we do, I mentioned before, having that develop branch on Acquia, we actually push to that branch first, and then we create the new branch that is the build branch, and push that branch. So it essentially pushes the code twice up to Acquia, once to Acquia develop and once to the build branch. So right here is a screenshot of what Acquia looks like. For those of you that are not familiar with this, Acquia Desktop, or not Desktop, Acquia Cloud has a really, really nice setup for managing your environments, for moving your code around, for moving your databases and your files around. And with the setup they have here, I've actually clicked on to prod for this. I didn't actually run this, but you'll see what I did here in a second. So you type in your build branch, at least partially. It'll do a quick search, narrow it down, and select the branch you want. And it'll ask you, are you sure? Do you really want to deploy this to this environment right now? And you just hit switch and go. One of the cool things you'll see is on this previous dashboard, right below this listing of all of your environments, it will actually show you a list of recent actions, any output from a console log. And so you can expand it, and you can see the output of a deploy. It'll run through all of its normal commands for copying things down. It'll run through any of your scripts, and so you'll start seeing up here where the commits or the drush commands start running. And it goes through the entire process, and then it tells you whether it's good or bad. If it's bad, you won't have a nice pretty icon. If it's good, you'll have a nice green icon at the top. And so yeah, you build your stuff, do what you need to do, and hopefully you profit. I did get permission from United Rentals to use their information for the build and deploy processes here. I have added my slides to my GitHub repository under talks. So any questions you guys might have, feel free to ask. Cool. Questions, comments, insults?
So the build process creates all the front-end assets from your SaaS or your LESS or whatever?
Yes, exactly.
What do your developers do locally?
You can have your own. So in the case of what we did, we would have either manually run the same commands that you were running on the build server, or we use Docksalt locally as well for all of our developer environments. And so you can create some custom commands in there. For example, on some of the newer sites we have on VML, or VML-YNR, we have under the Docksalt directory, there's commands, and I've created a local directory. So we just do fin local / whatever your command is. In this case, I created a fin local / build, and it'll just run all those build commands relevant to your local setup.
Okay. So you just don't have the developers commit those to the repo at all, they're only on
Correct. That way it keeps the repository smaller.
Is there a good way, do you have some kind of documentation for this entire process where, somebody can just go refer it and get a hang of it, like if somebody wants to implement it? So
I do. I need to add that to that repository too, but I will go ahead and add a detailed README.
Yeah.
Other questions? Sweet. Kept it short and sweet, so everyone has time to go do what they need to do. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.